Hello everyone. So welcome back to the latest lecture session. In this class I would just like to highlight some of the adverse environmental impacts that we are causing now, right. So at this stage we typically ask the students to list them, but I guess that is not what we are going to do. We are going to go forth. And one example, before we go forth, first reason is obviously why do I need to take the class, and why do I care? Let us say you want to immigrate to the US, or let us say you think you are going to get rich and stay in a cordoned off apartment, high rise, and you are going to have the AC on full blast. Well, all these things are akin to a person living in a bubble. The bubble will burst sooner rather than later. Your well-being is dependent upon the well-being of other humans. You are living in a society. So it's like a ladder. Obviously people are dependent upon each other now, right. And once one rung gives way, typically the system comes down crashing, right. And here obviously again, even if we do not care about our fellow human beings, let us say, and you think I am well enough and that is fine, think about your parents, your kids and your grandkids, or let us say the future generations. Without clean air and water, we are strangling the life out of this particular world. And that is the major reason why you need to care. And the thing is, there is no magic switch that will set things right once we go down, let us say, this path for a couple of more decades, let us say. It might then be, not it might, it will then be too late to do anything, or to do or bring about worthwhile change at that stage. Anyway, that is the reason why you need to care. So let us see what we can do at this particular stage. Pardon me, before we can see what we can do, as I discussed or mentioned earlier, we are going to look at some of the adverse effects due to human actions. One aspect that obviously is in the news, or at least until before the corona effect, or before corona came into the picture, was global warming now. So what do we have here? We have the annual mean and 5-year running mean. And I guess here are the industrial levels, let us say, or when industrial activity started in earnest, and then until I guess 2010, or let us say this is projected till 2020, I guess, right, or 2015 here. So 2020, let us see. So what do you see here? Well, for some reason we see a drop initially, and then you see a remarkable increase, or steady and remarkable increase, right. The key aspect is that there is an increase here and considerable increase. And what do we see here? With respect to pre-industrial levels, we see that it is, I guess, 0.4 here. So 1 degree centigrade at least, right, 1 degree centigrade here. And the issue here is, we do not want the world to become a pressure cooker, right. It will not last so long. I think change of 2 degrees centigrade is going to cause catastrophic effects, adverse effects on the climate, let us say. Already we are experiencing, remarkably severe events more frequently. We are talking about flooding, let us say. We are talking about droughts, we are talking about cyclones, and so on and so forth, right. And these are increasing in frequency too, and they are typically interrelated or tied up to or depend upon global warming. Again, more about this later. The reason I wanted to bring this out is typically, when we engage in discussion with our peers or so on and so forth, typically we can't remember data, at least I can't rather. But typically when faced with facts, people do listen. But nowadays in society, with fake news, being propagated like hell, providing accurate data and then drawing your conclusions by logical analysis or deduction, is remarkably important. And I will try to, provide the data before I try to, draw a conclusion, right. So again, here I am going to try to provide data. Again, I am going to provide the sources typically. Well, I am not providing the detailed source here, but I can give it to you if and when you require, let us say, right. And in that context, you can reach me at BHANU Bhanu Prakash V at the rate of ce.iitr.ac.in, and I am in the civil engineering department. And looks like I haven't mentioned that earlier. Anyway, I am Bhanu Prakash, and my email ID is bhanuprakashv at the rate of ce.iitr.ac.in, Okay. And I guess I am currently in room number 334A. In case you want to come by and meet me, and you are most welcome, right. So, here we do see a steady increase in the global temperature, right. Global land ocean temperature index, that is something to keep in mind, because we are going to come back to that. And here I guess again pre-industrial levels, and here we see the estimates for the near future, right. These are the projections, and I believe this is from the intergovernmental panel here, right, IPCC, for climate change 2007, and here I have the detailed what do we say reference that I looked at, and this graph is from that particular report. So, you can refer to that. So, what do you see now, depending upon the levels of what do we say carbon dioxide or such emissions, you are going to have wildly varying estimates here, right. And obviously, here we are going to, the global warming is going to lead to a considerable increase in the sea level, let us say, right. And again not just submergence, when we talk about increase in sea levels, we are talking about submergence of land, yes, displacement of or mass displacement of human beings, suffering, and so on and so forth. But concurrently you are going to have, again as I mentioned, our earth, let us say, is a closely knit family, and once you start putting pressure or causing adverse effects to particular set of what can I say aspects, it is going to have remarkable knock on effects, pardon me, on all the different aspects. So, this level of sea level change is going to be creating havoc not just to the humans, but to the global what do we say system, right, global ecosystem, pardon me. And what can they be? Well, that is difficult to predict, because you never know. I mean, until now it has never been tested or pushed so far. Again, that is one thing to keep in mind, global warming leading to sea level increase or increase in sea level, that is something to keep in mind. And with climate change, what do we experience now, right? And here let us look at the world map of global climate risk index, or those countries which are at a greater risk, let us say. So, what do we see, or where are we now? We are bang in the middle, let us say, with respect to high risk, and all our neighbors too, whom we deem either good or bad for various reasons. Again, personally I feel we are all in it together, but again let us not get into that. At least with respect to India, we see that we are remarkably susceptible to the adverse effects caused due to global warming now. So, what are they and why? I guess we will look at that. Why? Well, one aspect is we are until now anyway mostly agriculturally dependent economy, right. Ours is an economy dependent upon agriculture. There are, I think, still 60% of our people who are dependent upon agriculture directly or indirectly, and most of our farming is water intensive. With our levels of population density, not just population density, we are already facing acute or severe water shortages, and this is going to get remarkably worse later. And having a dry spell for 2 years and torrential rainfall for 1 year does not really work out for us, as in just saying that okay, the average rainfall has been fine does not work out. More often than not, we are now having extended dry spells followed by torrential downpour or rainfall. It is like asking a guy to keep breathing freely for 23 hours and stopping his nose or blocking his nose, pardon me, for 1 hour, just because for most of the time you keep him happy does not mean he is going to survive, right. Again, that is one particular aspect. I believe here we have one other graphic here with respect to climate change on agricultural yields. So, you see here that the yields are suspected to drop considerably in both in North India and South India, and also in Bangladesh and so on and so forth, I guess, right. So, we are bang in the middle, and again you see most of the African countries here that are going to be remarkably susceptible to what do we say global warming, and again their livelihood again here is agriculture, and once that hits, that is going to hit pretty badly. And agriculture again, obviously food, it underpins most of what we do, right, and this is going to have a knock on effect. That is something to keep in mind. So, let us look at metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that is being given out. Who are the major producers here? So, what do we see here? First, I guess China here. We do have better graphics here later, pardon me, and then next USA, the European Union, and then India, Russia, and so on and so forth. But again you see the usual culprits here, if I may call them, right. Well, China has been, what do we say, building up its industrial capacity at a great pace. So, obviously, if we look at the rate, that is going to throw a clearer picture about, or provide a clearer picture, pardon me, about what has been happening recently. But what do we see here? We see that those countries with, even though, I mean, those countries with less populations and lesser population density than, let us say, China or India, contribute remarkably to global warming, right. So, keep in mind, this is not with respect to per person. If it were with respect to per person, USA and Europe would be remarkably ahead. So, there is a disproportionate effect or adverse effect on the earth due to, let us say, the developed countries. This is not just my opinion, well, that is certainly borne out by facts, right. So, that is something to keep in mind. Though China and India are considerable contributors, one thing to keep in mind is, when we look at per capita or per person impact, let us say, or releases, the developed countries are going to have a much higher footprint now, right. So, let us move on. So, what do we see here? We see the effect, I guess, on what do we say, the ozone layer, I guess, right. And so, here we have on the x axis ozone in parts per million or ppm, and in stratosphere we have the ozone. Well, ozone is not, many hundreds of meters thick, it is only a few meters thick at a particular level of the concentration that we require, right. Ozone obviously required to keep the UVC out, UVC radiation out, right. So, that plays a remarkable role, and due to different reasons, typically CFCs, let us say, and different releases of different compounds, we what do we say, damage the ozone, right, ozone layer, pardon me. And what do we see here? We see here the average area of the ozone hole and its size in million square kilometers. So, here 1980 and so on and so forth, by the time we come to 1985, I guess, right, it is already the size of the area of Antarctica. What is the size of the area of Antarctica now? The ozone hole is already the size of Antarctica now, and by, I guess, 95 or within 10 years, it is the size of North America, Canada, US, and what do we say, Mexico combined now, right. And then, I guess, people woke up, started taking some corrective action, as in globally people banned the CFCs, and then you see some improvement, but I guess we still need to get the latest figures. But to my recollection, from what I read even a couple of years ago, the ozone hole, I guess, the situation is relatively better. But again, recently people detected what do we say, release of CFCs from China again, and that leading to further damage, but again difficult to prove those things. But I do remember that, CFCs are still being released by some industries now and then, and there are other compounds too which can destroy the ozone hole, which is critical to human life, let us say, right. Otherwise, you are going to have increasing levels of cancer. So, I guess this is, I mean, NASA has a remarkably good graphic with respect to time, right. I would suggest that you look at that, and here I guess you see how big the ozone hole is at a particular point in time. Let us say, I think this was in 2004, I guess, when it was at its peak, right. And here let us move on. We looked at what now, global warming, and we looked at ozone hole, right, or the effects on ozone layer, and then obviously we are looking at the adverse effects on water. So, if we look at the map of India, let us see, let me see if I can get that, or okay, I will try that later. Again, if you know, even if you recollect, or if I can ask you to think for a second and consider where you are from, let us say, right, Delhi, let us say, Agra, Mathura, Lucknow, or any of the major cities, let us say, that you see, or even if you look at Indus civilization, Harappa civilization, where is it that you see groups of humans prospering? They prosper typically where you had access to plentiful or bountiful water, and then obviously suitable weather conditions, right. Delhi, Agra, Mathura along Yamuna, and then obviously the river Ganga providing, what do we say, succor to, I think, 40% of the Indian population, right. And again, at least Andhra Pradesh, where I come from, you have Vijayawada right along Krishna. And now what is happening though? You have increasing levels of water being removed from the particular ground, right. or groundwater being pumped out at a remarkably high rate, and depletion of groundwater year on year, and more importantly, we are not recharging the groundwater. So, what is going to happen? You are going to have remarkable, what do we say, ingress of salt water or sea water into the inland, and you are going to have salt water which will kill the trees, or it won't let agriculture flourish, let us say, or the plants flourish now, right. You have remarkable effects, and other than that, even humans, let us say, have considerable, what do we say, difficulty in finding potable drinking water. And what are we doing it once we are using it? Are we treating it and then discharging it so that we can reuse it later? Not really. So this is the case with respect to Yamuna. The picture is of Yamuna. Simple Google search will, I guess, lead you to similar pictures for Yamuna. And Yamuna, I guess, when you look at dark pathar, it's remarkably pristine. Even Haryana, yes, it's remarkably good. The water quality in Haryana or just above Delhi is still pretty good. But once it passes or starts passing through Delhi, and by the time it comes downstream of Delhi, the situation is no better than a sewage canal, right. The flow is typically less, and during the non-monsoon season that has always been the case, but now the quality of the water is no better than sewage now. I guess it's been worse since 10 years or more than that, but now we have remarkable levels of industrial activity, burgeoning human population all around Delhi, and then all the sewage more or less goes to Mathura and then Agra, where they treat this partially or untreated sewage and then supply it to various parts of the city, right. Again, it's 80% untreated waste and 100% ecologically dead. Now people are taking steps, but the issue is that most of the waste streams, they are not tapped, as in you have to have the sewage collection network to bring the waste to a particular sewage treatment plant, treat it and then release the water. And again, this is a costly affair, remarkably costly affair. Maybe I will try to provide some of the data later on, but this is a remarkably costly affair. So again, in India, let us say, even though now I guess the government is trying to take steps to treat the Ganges, why is that a humongous task? Because you have to be able to collect the waste first to be able to treat it and then discharge it. It's not just the industries that are leading to, what do we say, surface water pollution. Our human activity, daily human activity or human feces, let us say, and such, that obviously leads to organic pollution of the surface waters. So we are talking about river Yamuna, probably the most polluted river in India, and why, I guess, right. It's because of the sewage, both treated. I mean, Delhi treats its sewage pretty well, but maybe can do a better job, but due to historic reasons, and we being a developed country or developing country, and having different priorities at that time. At that time, livelihood, I guess, was a remarkable issue, just mere survival was an issue. Now we are having to think of other aspects too, as our levels of comfort are getting better or levels of livelihood are getting better, right. So again, now we are talking about industrial waste being dumped into, what do we say, river Yamuna, or the treated waste. Even though it's treated, it's still going to have some organic content. We are going to look at that. It's still going to have some BOD and COD. And in this context, I need to mention one thing. So we just talked about BOD and COD now, right. So in this class, we are not going to talk about generic aspects now. We are certainly going to have some calculations, two reasons why. One, to help you understand, let us say, rather than just try to give you a brief overview, going through these calculations and such, and being more aware of these variables and why they are important will make you better informed when you go out there, right, into the real world. Other than that, when we just talked about theoretical aspects without involving you and or making you use your pen, let us say, and thus the brain cells, people typically used to doze off in the class, and I am sure even with these online lectures, quite a few people would already be skipping the relevant content, right. So to avoid that, let us say, we are going to have some calculations or a significant number of, what do we say, numerical problems, where we are going to look at variables and how they affect us and so on and so forth. In this context, we just talked about BOD and COD, which are estimates of how polluted the particular water is. And then what do we say, Yamuna, I guess BOD is as high as 30 to 40 milligram per liter, it is remarkably polluted, and COD can be anywhere between 100 to 150 milligram per liter. So again, BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, and chemical oxygen demand, COD. So we are going to look at this later, but again something that I wanted to put out there, right. So let's move on to the next slide. Which river? I guess people typically get this pretty much. It's river Yamuna. And again, now I guess we as a society are at a stage where we keep our houses clean, or rather try to keep our houses clean. Not the hostels now, just the houses, we try to keep them clean. But we don't care about how the roads are or how clean the roads or our general environment is, right. So because people don't realize it, and I guess the prevailing human nature in India is that as long as it doesn't bother me right now, I don't really care, and if it bothers someone else, I don't really care too. Well, it's going to affect everyone because we are all in the same boat now, right. If I release carbon dioxide or a toxic gas here, people in the surrounding area are going to be remarkably affected. Again, we will come back to that later. So we see more often than not that in India, the environment is remarkably polluted. Though here you can literally see the pollution, right. That's obviously not the case with water or air sometimes. Sometimes, because when you go to Delhi, you can literally feel the pollution, let's say, right, or other what do we say, cities with considerable human or industrial footprint now, right. So again, these are things I guess that are that every country has to go through, and we are at this stage, and we need to see how as a group of people we are going to respond to make things better for ourselves, right. No one is going to come and make it better for ourselves. I know there is going to be a tipping point when we realize that, or when we have to realize that it's starting to affect our health and our kids and our future generations ability to make their lives better, right. So then we have to be able to take corrective action. Let's see when we will reach there. Again, why I have this photograph is here you can see this literally, but when you talk about air, water and typically groundwater, it's difficult to estimate the level of pollution and what causes it and so on and so forth. We will look at that. And one other aspect I wanted to point out is there are increasing levels of human and conflict between humans and animals. So obviously here I am trying to ask the students for their thoughts and what they think the causes are, right. So obviously there are typically what do we say, a wide range of answers, but typically people hit the nail on the head. The issue is that with the burgeoning population or remarkably high or increasing levels of population, we as humans are branching out into areas which we have never ventured into. And obviously there is going to, as we encroach upon, let's say, the homes, if I may call that, let's say, of the animals, there is going to be obviously increased conflict between the wildlife and humans now. But the issue is, it's not as if I do not care, or I do not need to care about how these wildlife plays role in my life, let's see. Why is that? Because these wildlife, they are remarkably important in sustaining the health of a particular forest now. And again, forests obviously they are our lungs, right. The Amazonian forest, let's say, typically are called the lungs of the world, right. They are called so for a reason. We will go back to that. Again, I guess life on earth is interlinked between most species or almost all the species. Every species has its own role, and we see that humans are going out there, and now the latest what is it now, crisis that we are facing, corona, right. What do we have here? We have people going into nature, I think consumption of wild animals, let's say. We have the wet markets, right, for the wild animals and their consumption, and that's how I guess you had transmission of this virus from wildlife to humans, and this one mutated pretty well, and it is able to transmit from one human to the other pretty quickly, right. Again, we will come back to that, but human animal conflict is remarkably increasing. One obvious cause is that we are recklessly expanding. We are recklessly expanding without thinking of the consequences, and that's one particular reason. So on a lighter note, or I guess to capture the students' attention, we try to bring them back to a place that's nearer to home, let's say. Typically people would like to go and visit Himalayas or go to Kashmir, let's say, to have some fun. and for a change in their pace of life, let us say, right. And we see a similar situation here. So, I guess some people might have realized where this photograph is from now, but if not, I ask people to take a moment to realize or think it out loud. Let us say, this is, I believe, from Bangalore, okay. And I think this was, I think from 4 or 5 years ago. You have remarkably affluent neighborhood all round, okay. This is a key aspect, remarkably affluent neighborhoods all round, and you have these canals or minor streams supposedly that play a huge role in what do we say, the transport of water during storms, let us say. They act as storm water drains, let us say. If not, you are going to have flooding. That is again a different aspect, but you see the adverse effect of encroaching upon such particular important stormwater drains in Mumbai, let us say, or in Chennai, let us say, when we had remarkably severe cases of flooding, or even in Kerala where reckless expansion and lack of drainage leads to what do we say now, landslips too, I guess, right. Again, what do we have here now? We have remarkable levels of frothing here, it is not snow, that is something you can be sure of. This is not snow, and this is in Bangalore. So, this is lake frothing, this is froth, nothing more than froth. It stinks big time. If you are wondering about why it is an issue, it stinks big time and makes people nauseous, throw up, and I guess you can forget about the quality of the water here. So, people were not sure what is causing this level of frothing now. Well, first aspect is that when people analyze the water for the general parameters, they saw that the dissolved phosphorus concentration was remarkably high, okay. And phosphorus leads to different issues, let us say, with respect to lake eutrophication, but that is down the line. This phosphorus, when it goes somewhere, right, it is going to trigger this algal bloom. We will come back to that and why that is relevant. But what do we see out here? We see lake frothing and people suffering from the effects, at least the people in this locality. And I guess, to my recollection, I guess it has been some time when the CPCB looked at it and tried to find out why the phosphorus level here was remarkably high. They saw that this affluent neighborhood had a remarkable number of people, or a higher percentage of people with pets, right, and they used to wash them, I guess, more often than we wash ourselves. I think 4 or 5 days per day with remarkable levels of what do we say, shampoos or detergent now. And typically most of these detergents and such, they have phosphorus in them, right, and or phosphates, I guess, and you had remarkable levels of release of this what do we say, frothing detergents or shampoo into this particular canal, and people suffered ill effects for considerable time. Again, key aspect is phosphates or phosphorus here, right. So, something to keep in mind. And here we have a GIF. So, just take a moment to understand what it is, and I guess most of you are pretty young now to maybe remember this, but maybe those with some general knowledge should be able to figure out what this is. So, I will just let it play out twice or thrice for you to understand or try to understand. So, I guess this is the tsunami that we people experienced. Maybe you guys, or I am sure you guys did not experience it. So, it originated out here in the ocean, let us say, the earthquake, and then the tsunami. You see how it traveled considerable distance, right, and it affected certainly Sri Lanka, considerable coast of India, and so on and so forth. And there is a reason why I am trying to draw your attention here. So, here you have the epicenter of the earthquake and then the tsunami here, right. And what or which countries do you think bore the brunt of the tsunami, and where would you expect more deaths now, right? Well, you can do a Google search, but let us see, I guess, obviously some of the countries that would have been affected greatly, certainly Indonesia and maybe Malaysia, but I am not sure if the tsunami hit Malaysia here, but to my knowledge, yes. And then Thailand here, and certainly Myanmar with its long coast, and certainly Bangladesh and India and Sri Lanka. Certainly it was pretty badly affected, that I can certainly remember. I remember Tamil Nadu being pretty badly affected, Sri Lanka being badly affected, certainly Indonesia. So, let us look at the numbers and see if there is some if you can point the odd man out here, let us see, right. We are expecting high casualties in Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia. Obviously, there were some deaths here too, that is why these were highlighted. These were all the countries where there were reported deaths were reported due to tsunami, let us say. But we are talking about those countries where we would expect greater deaths pardon me, and looks like the tsunami was in 2004. And what do we see? Obviously, Indonesia, right, remarkably high, 1.2 lakhs. Then Sri Lanka again with its long coast. Then India, yes. Thailand too, yes. And Malaysia, I guess as we expected, it is on the other side. So, as I suspected rather, it did not bear or have many casualties, right. Thailand too had considerable casualties. But if you look at it, or if I can ask you to maybe take a couple of seconds and try to point the odd man out, people typically let us say, pardon me, typically talk about Myanmar now, and maybe sometimes Bangladesh too, but Myanmar certainly. Why is that? If you look at it here, there are considerable effects on Myanmar here, let us say, or supposed to be considerable effects on Myanmar here. Okay. Well, if not in lakhs, I guess certainly. And one reason why the deaths were less was because of the mangrove forests here. And you can look at Bangladesh too, considerable mangrove forests out there. This was in 2000 anyway. And again, all along the coast of Myanmar, you see considerable cover of mangrove forests, let us say. And these played a certain role, or considerable role rather, in attenuating the adverse effect due to tsunami. Though there were some or considerable mangrove cover along Thailand and so on and so forth, or these countries too, the intensity there was obviously higher. So, obviously, I am not saying mangrove forests are the only aspect that we need to look at. Obviously, population density, right, the intensity with which tsunami hit Myanmar compared to the other countries and so on and so forth. But when you looked at the data, or when you look at the data rather in greater detail, one of the variables that played a considerable role in reducing the number of deaths there was certainly the mangrove forest cover, let us say. And if we look at the trend, let us say, with respect to 2000 to 2012, have we learned the lesson? Not really now. Here we have total tree cover loss in mangroves by year, let us say, right. You see that again 2004, and then consistent, if not considerable increase, let us see. I guess there is a decrease here, but we need to get more recent data. But again, you see that there is considerable increase. And where is it that you see the highest loss? Obviously, it is predominant in Asia, let us see, right. And that is what you see now. What do we see? We typically, as a group of humans, people typically are driven by short term needs, let us say, and we cut the branch upon which we are sitting now. So, what I am trying to say here is, in search of livelihood, obviously people try to take shortcuts, if I may say so, and then you are going to have adverse effects which come back to bite us in the back remarkably hard. And that is something that is relevant here. So, here I guess there was one paper, but with some sparse data, I would not pay too much attention to it, but I wanted to point it out nonetheless. If you guys come across better data, just let me know and I will replace this with your particular reference. So, here we have coastal mangrove forests, how they mitigated tsunami, and the authors and the particular year in which they published this particular data, and I believe this is for Tamil Nadu. So, here you see that area of coastal vegetation. So, where the coastal vegetation was high, the number of deaths was relatively low, but where the coastal vegetation was less, let us say, the number of death toll was considerably high. Well, I guess that is something that we expected, but so we always want data to back up our expectations or assumptions, right. So, that is why I wanted to what do we say, mention that. Obviously, there are other aspects to distance of human habitation to certainly elevation from mean sea level, but here you do see a certain what do we say, trend. Obviously, it is not linear like the authors are predicting, but there is certainly a trend there. That is something that I wanted to point out here. And here what do we see here, again developing countries, you have increasing levels of population and population density, people going out trying to make a livelihood for themselves, right. You can't really blame it for themselves. If a person has an alternative, yes, certainly he will choose that, but when he is hungry and wants to feed his family, what else will he do? He will go out and try to make a living for himself. But I guess there are now multinational companies that try to do that too for immense profit. So here you see farms out here in place of mangrove forests, and with respect to the level of contrast, you can see that here in Myanmar how it is, or in Thailand how it is, but after development how it along the coast, let us say in place of mangrove forests, how the situation is here. And rather than this, I believe I have one particular picture here that provides a better illustration of what is happening out there. Here we have, I guess, Honduras, and I guess the data I have it is from NASA Earth Observatory, and you can follow up on the particular reference if you want to. And here what do we have? Here we have 1987 and mangrove or forest cover, let us say, right, mangrove swamps. And here you see all around here aquaculture or aqua farming, as in shrimp or aqua farming now, where earlier you had swamps, let us say, that played a considerable role in biodiversity and maybe mitigating natural disasters, let us say. We now see remarkable levels of human footprint, and that is mainly due to aquaculture, let us say, or if not shrimp, I guess aquaculture, pardon me. And this is the case in almost all these developing countries that we talked about, either Indonesia, Vietnam or such, and certainly in Tamil Nadu and so on and so forth, right. That is something to keep in mind. And this is the typical picture, or a better picture rather, I guess, how the mangrove forests are being cut down for the sake of aquaculture or economic growth, let us say, right. And here is something, this is something that I came across when I was preparing the slides for our students last year, right. Keep in mind now that I am recording this in 2020 and I think it is July. Yes, it is indeed July. Okay, so here in 2019, this is a plaque. I will read it out loud verbatim, right. Here it is a plaque in Iceland, if I am not wrong. It is a letter to the future. What does it say? Oak is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. Within the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and we know what needs to be done. Only you the future generations, only you the future generations will know if we did it. So there is not going to be a starker reminder of what the situation is and what needs to be done. So the first Icelandic glacier is gone, it is no more classified as a glacier, and they expect within the next 200 years all the glaciers are going to be done. Again, we are talking about Iceland here. If the glaciers are melting at such a fast rate, think about where we are. But the aspect here that I would draw your attention to is that we know what is happening and we know what needs to be done, but we are not sure if we as a species, let us say, can come together and save ourselves and the generations coming after us from disaster. So that is something that I want to point out, and the key aspect is the carbon dioxide concentration in the gaseous phase is 415 ppm or parts per million. This was in August 2019, right. So again, that is something that hit me pretty well. So I want to just spend a couple of more minutes on it. So first off, Iceland's 400 glaciers to be lost to the climate crisis. Again, what was its status a century ago? It covered 15 square kilometers, right, and measured 50 meters thick, but now it is less than 1 square kilometer and less than 15 meter thick, and it is no more a glacier. So that is one particular aspect. If there is ever a warning that pops up, well, this is going to be one. You are always going to have moments in life where you realize maybe the path that you are taking is not conducive to you or your family, or yourself rather. Why the family now? And where it's a wake up call. Well, this is the wake up call if ever there was one, right? So rather than going through that, so here throughout the class, or pardon me, the online session, I am going to refer to articles from the Guardian. The Guardian is a newspaper unlike most other newspapers. Why? It's mostly, not mostly, almost funded by the contributions that you and I make, or you and I, the readers, make to it. So it is not dependent upon any particular family or business. So is not obliged typically, or not obliged, let us say, to bend to the pressures of that particular family or wealthy family or business. Now it is relatively independent and is at the forefront of most, what do we say, some of the most investigative articles that have come out, let us say, be it with respect to Edward Snowden or the Panama files and so on and so forth. And I have come to trust this particular newspaper, and maybe we will also look at a few articles from the Hindu in India. Again, my trust in these two newspapers has grown over the years with respect to their ability to present facts, be impartial, right, and then present the logical reasoning and keep knocking on and knocking on and knocking on. As in, if I just speak about any particular aspect, with the glut of information out there and the glut of videos or such that you have out there, the relevance you pay to what I say is going to be lost. But if I am able to prove my integrity, which is what the Guardian and the Hindu newspaper did, people start paying attention to them, and that is what has been happening with me too. So I will typically present considerable data from the Guardian. The reason I have stressed upon these two papers is that when we present data in this chaotic world we live in, we need to know whether the data that we are presenting is reliable. So that is the reason I am mentioning this, right. So what do we have here? We have the daily mean temperature in Celsius, right, between 1960 and 2000, and this is in the Arctic, right. So that is what we see, day 1 to day 360 or 365, I guess, right. Obviously negative for most of the period, reaching 0 in the summer months, and again remarkably cold. But what do we see, or what did they observe in 2018 now? You see that it is remarkably high by up to 20 degrees centigrade, as they are trying to say, minus 10 here, right. So though there are considerable variations, right, that is expected, but you see that in general the temperature even at the Arctic is remarkably high. And I guess the other day I was reading in the Guardian that the temperatures in Siberia are around, Siberia, right, Siberia, look that up, are around 35 degrees centigrade. In Roorkee, I guess it is 32 or I think 35 degrees centigrade now, and of all places in Siberia, they were experiencing 35 degrees centigrade now. Well, I am not saying you will go and what do we say, reverse global warming, but having a citizen or a person who is more aware of where we are itself will play a role when you need to make choices, let us see. So that is the reason we are going through this. So that is something to keep in mind. The stark reminders that we have are quite a lot now, right. So let us move on. So current issues of concern, let us summarize them. Global warming and climate change, I guess species extinction, this is something we will come across, and why not come across we will discuss later, though we did not discuss that a lot until now. Soil degradation and loss of wetlands and agricultural land, right, wetlands certainly, which are remarkably rich centers of rich ecosystems, let us say, right. And ozone layer depletion, yes, concentration of toxics with more toxins or toxic compounds being released out there, and depletion and degradation of resources, yes, that is something. I guess these are the major aspects of concern now, and we will look at some of these aspects and see what you can do or what we can do, if not immediately, over time, to make things better, right. So let me just go through a couple of slides and then I will end this session. So here again is the particular what do we say, link where I access this data from. Here on the y axis I have carbon dioxide equivalents in Gillion tons is it? I guess you can, or gigatons, pardon me, not gillion tons, right? You can look that up here. And on the x-axis we have the year 1990 to 2014 or 15. So what do I have here? I have the greenhouse gases here, right? So what is predominant here? Carbon dioxide, right? That's what you see out here, carbon dioxide, followed by methane and other gases, let us say, but primarily we are concerned with carbon dioxide. Well, that is a no brainer, right? But let us look at the major culprits, if I may call them, and what are the major industries or sources of emission of this carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases, and why, or with the economic choices that you make, how you can bring about change, right? So let us go forth again. As you see, 1990 to 2014, I guess it doubled, right, within a span of, well, how many years is this? 2015, 25 years, I guess, right? It doubled. Now that is considerable increase, or almost doubled rather. But if I increase it or look at the data from 1850, now you will see the difference. We were at 1990 earlier, right? Where were we earlier? We were at 1990, and we were looking at it until 2014 or somewhere out here, right? This was the phase we were looking at earlier. It did not seem like a remarkable increase, but when you compare it to pre-industrial levels, you see the remarkable levels of carbon dioxide that we have been pumping into the atmosphere, right? And obviously it is going to be a tipping point. It is not as if I am going to realize that I can't sustain life on earth at this particular levels of what do we say, carbon dioxide being pumped into the atmosphere, and I am going to stop it today, and the next year it is going to get better, right? Well, that is not how it is going to work. We have accumulated, I guess, if I may say so, 150 years of sin. Let me not say 150, maybe 50 years of sin, if I may say so, and people are going to feel the effects, for God knows how many generations down the line, right? And I guess if you looked at the latest intergovernmental panel on climate change, they say that if it is beyond 2 degrees centigrade temperature change, there are going to be catastrophic changes, and it's you are going down a slope from which you can never recover. That's the data. But will people listen? Will the politicians listen and take a call or not? Well, that's something we will know, I guess, only later, right? So let us move on. Remarkably high concentrations of what is it? Carbon dioxide being released from, I guess, after World War II, if I may say so, World War II, let us say, right? Remarkably high levels. And who is emitting this, right? Greenhouse gases, who is emitting it? So you have I have the European Union here. This is the European Union. So looks like their what do we say, emissions peaked around 1980 and then have been decreasing since then. And then the least developing countries, or least developed countries have always been so. And North America, when we say North America, we are typically referring to USA and I guess Canada. Well, though Mexico is out there in North America too, I do not think the emissions from Mexico are that significant. Typically we are talking about USA out here. You see the, you see this profile. So what I am trying to, emphasize here is the developed countries, let us say, who now have remarkably high levels of or standards of living, have pumped considerable levels of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But who is going to pay the price now? If we looked at our, what do we say, or those countries, let us say, if you remember, we looked at 1 or 2 slides, I think in the last session, where we had information about those countries which were at the maximum risk. So which countries were at maximum risk? The least developed countries, let us say mostly in Africa, and India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and to some extent China and some parts of Australia and so on and so forth. So, well, this is a conundrum now, we, let us say, haven't contributed to global warming a lot, and only now are we becoming an industrialized nation. Cleaner technologies typically cost more, but who is going to pay for that? And if the industry here in India, adopts cleaner technologies, it cannot, let us say, compete probably, or typically rather, with the companies selling similar product elsewhere. Why? I guess they already have access to cleaner technologies at lesser prices, let us say. And this is a conundrum now, but the guy in India, he wants to survive. We need to go forth. We can't just be sitting idle, or people don't sit idle while others just work and make merry, right? Everyone wants to make merry. How do we go about it? As in developed countries, are they going to take the responsibility and clean up this earth, or try to see to it that their share is amply compensated by their actions now? Well, not really, right? That's not how the world works. So, let me look at one other aspect. Here I broke it down into different countries. Here we have United States. What do we see out here? This pink, right? It more or less, what do we say, I guess, reached a steady state around 2010 and 2016, but to my knowledge, after Mr. Donald Trump became the president, again there was an increase in their greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I guess I have the data only here till 2017 if I am wrong, if I am not wrong, but from what I know, their greenhouse gas emissions increased, but you need to check that. And what do we see here? European Union, as we discussed earlier, in 1980s, they hit their peak. Since then, they have been putting forth or implementing guidelines and standards that brought down their levels of greenhouse gas emissions. Let's say they have, if we look at the data later, but they made a massive switch to cleaner what do we say, types of energy production. Let's say, right? We'll move on. And now where are we now? China and India now. Well, here we are, India slowly taking off from 1990, right? And if you see, China too was more or less in the same ballpark until not even 90, I guess, 1970s, and then you see it took off remarkably or exponentially. And now I guess with with China now being more or less a developed economy, if I can say so, and because the Chinese are now facing considerable criticism, and they are also facing what do we say, the adverse effects of pollution, they started what do we say, making the switch to, or looking at implementing or enforcing guidelines that make sure that they do not emit remarkably high levels of carbon dioxide, let us say, right. So, with that I will end today's session, and we will go back or look at this again in the next session. But one aspect I want you to think about is, this is the situation now. Who is going to pay? As in India or the other relatively less developed countries too want to develop, but now there are increasing curbs, and also now the earth is at a precipice, right. It is going to fall off the cliff any moment now. Who is going to pay? Who is going to make the earth better, right? That is a huge issue now, right. Well, I guess with that I will not what do we say, bother you any longer, and thank you.